In this video, we're going to talk about the three primary problems that contribute and exacerbate anxiety. Now, these three primary problems are really lessons and principles that just no one ever teaches us. And I think one of the things that's really important to highlight earlier on is that if you're struggling with anxiety and if you're finding it a real challenge, then no one has ever taught us this before. We have so many lessons when we're growing up, but no one actually teaches us how to observe, how to challenge, and how to change the way that we think and feel. So if you are someone who's struggling with anxiety, which was why you'd be on this course, first of all, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. There's no fault or blame attached to you, and there's nothing really that you've done wrong. It's more that you haven't been provided with the education, the tools, and the skills that I think every single human being should have. So in this program, we're going to give you the practical strategies and we're going to give you the understanding to actually underpin this education. And when you understand how it works, why it works, and how you can change it, very, very quickly you'll start to move from feeling quite overwhelmed and quite challenged, which is what many people feel to begin with, to then feel actually empowered to know that you can change this because it's all under your control. But just as with any complex job, if you don't have the specific tools and the training of how to do it, then it doesn't matter how much effort you put in, you probably won't get very far. So we're all about upskilling you in terms of education, upskilling you in terms of tools, and then helping you to make the transformation. Okay, let's talk about the three primary problems. Now, the first primary problem is self-talk. So in particular, negative self-talk. And there's a couple of contributing factors to this. Now, first of all, many of us develop unhelpful thinking patterns that we observe from others, that we learn from those around us, and we often do this quite early on. So we do this at quite a young age. And these unhelpful thinking patterns just become ingrained in our psyche, and we practice and practice and practice them over such a long period that they end up becoming habitual and they become automatic. And when these thinking patterns become automatic, they fall out of your conscious awareness and they just start happening unconsciously. So these unhelpful thinking patterns can be a real problem in terms of getting you stuck and actually stopping you breaking out of the cycles because they happen at such an unconscious level, often we're not aware of them. So negative self-talk is a huge contributor to feelings of anxiety. Now, if you're someone who also criticizes yourself, who speaks to yourself quite harshly, all of this fits into that negative self-talk category. The second primary problem, which is our second S, and this is self-belief. So as we'll cover in much more detail, as we go through life and you have those painful, negative, or traumatic experiences, the way that the mind processes these and the way that the mind stores these leads to and creates feelings of anxiety. And many of us have these incidents or events sort of scattered throughout our past. And what happens is we tend to forget where they come from, and we tend to actually start noticing the feelings, and then everything gets a little bit blurry and everything gets too challenging to work through. So these negative, painful, and challenging experiences have a direct correlation to actually the feelings of anxiety that we have. So learning how they are sort of formatted, how they are stored, and the impact that they have then gives us a really clear blueprint for how we can change them. So we've got negative self-talk as our first S, then we've got a lack of self-belief from our second, because as these events accumulate slowly over time, they start to erode our self-confidence, they erode the certainty that we have, and actually they start to create anxiety. And then a really interesting dynamic is created. So we start to feel anxiety based on these past events. And this anxiety causes us to challenge or doubt ourselves, which then leads to more anxiety. So we start to set up this vicious cycle, which unless we know how to break, will just continue and compound over time. So this second S of self-belief is a really important one. The third S is all about speaking and communication. So if we think you have this negative internal dialogue and you have these past painful experiences that are eroding your self-belief, both of these together combine to create the third primary problem, and this is around problems with communicating, not articulating your ideas, having a lack of confidence in terms of speaking up and expressing yourself. So speaking and communication then starts to create its own problem. And when we have all three of these combined, so we have a negative self-talk, then we have a lack of self-belief, and then we have challenges in terms of our speaking ability and our communication, they all feed into one another and we just create this vicious loop of anxiety, which is really difficult to get out of, and by its nature gets worse over time. So in this program, we're going to talk through actually how do we transform these three primary problems into clarity of thought. So this is clarity in terms of your thinking and your observation of your thinking. The second solution that we're looking for is certainty. So helping you to have certainty in the value that you bring, the skills that you have, and the value that you can offer the world. And then finally, having confidence to express yourself. So we transform these three primary problems into clarity, into certainty, and into confidence. And when these are around, anxiety just cannot live. So let's move on and go deeper.